why did you launch your podcast? Like, and I really want to hear the why behind the why. Like, what got you to decide that you ought to have that ultimately?
Yeah. So when I started the podcast in the business journey that I've kind of shared, from being an ER nurse practitioner all the way to now creating and launching my own health and fitness program, virtual health and fitness program, I started my podcast sort of in the middle of this journey. So it would have been in good grief, what was it? 2022, I think, January 2022. Feels so much longer than that. And part of it was because in this business journey, it was sort of a personal revelation as well, experience. I have been working with a company called Brand Builders Group. They're amazing. They're a personal brand strategist company, and they're all about personal brands. And the first part of the work that I had to do for my business was really figuring out what is my heartbeat and what makes me unique. What are ways that I've been uniquely gifted to serve others? And part of that process was identifying that communication and connection are two of my strengths. And as part of, any good coacher, as Adam would say, one of the things that they encouraged was, okay, then how can you use those gifts? And so it was very quickly determined that podcasting would be a good option. And interestingly, it combined a skill that I didn't realize I'd been honing for 10 years, which was interviewing. As an emergency medicine nurse practitioner, I was interviewing people for a living. And an interesting element of interviewing, as well as podcasting, this goes into the next question, but what makes a successful one? And it is learning the art of asking better questions. And I was doing that for years, quite literally saving lives based on how good my questions were. So anyway, it was just sort of an interesting combination of all my experience and skills working with people, asking good questions. And podcasting just felt like a very natural next step. Although I will say, to be clear, I did not have a really clarified message what my podcast was going to be focused in on. And so that's not necessarily how I'd recommend everybody start, but I didn't have a clear sense of where my business was going yet. I just knew podcasting was the next best step for me. So when I first started Imperfectly Empowered, the message was ultimately, we're listening to people with authentic stories and expert advice, inspiring others with expert stories and authentic stories and expert advice. Now we're more niche down, but that's where it started and why.
I think we might need to get there. So you also mentioned what makes the successful podcast. Remind us, what do you say makes a truly successful show?
I think first and foremost, you have to make sure that you are clarifying at some point in the journey, ultimately, what is your definition of success for the podcast? I think at some point that needs to be clarified, because if you want podcasting to be your primary business model, then there are certain indicators of success that you need to clearly set as checkpoints. Like, we need to meet these indicators. So if that is your primary business model, then you need to make sure that you are, ranking, that you're getting globally rated because you want that authority. And you want to make sure that you are really clearly niching down your target market, because if podcasting is your primary business model, then the best way to make money off of that is going to be sponsorships. And sponsors want to make sure you have perfect alignment with your target market, which means you need to be able to clarify very quickly, who am I targeting and what is the very specific way that I am serving them. So maybe it's business marketing, maybe it is nutrition specifically, maybe it is adoptive parents. So I think number one, you need to clarify what is your end goal for your podcast. In my case, I did quickly figure out that I did not want podcasting to be my primary business model. For me, my primary business model launching in January is the service that I offer, the Evergreen Course and Community on the virtual Early Morning Habit app. So for me, then the podcast, what is sort of terming success when it comes to my end goal for it, is ultimately seeing the Early Morning Habit getting traffic from my podcast. So that's kind of tying in the question. I keep leading into your next question, but how I use that to build business. But if we're generally speaking, what makes a successful podcast, I think it includes everything from making sure it is really, really easy for your guests to be a guest on the podcast. That was really wordy, but it's very significant because there are podcasts that, frankly, it's a little difficult to be a guest. It's hard to figure out what paperwork you're filling out. The actual process is a little ambiguous. It's not easy to leave a review. I also make it super, super easy. The majority of my reviews are probably from guests. And that's partly because I have made it really, really easy for them to leave a review. And I remind them multiple times via email when I'm preparing them, hey, your podcast is going to be produced on this day. There's always, if you haven't left a review yet, please review it here. And there's a hyperlinked. That makes it really easy. And then doing giveaways for my listeners to leave reviews. Sometimes it's just personally reaching out to somebody that I know really appreciated a specific episode and just saying, hey, thank you so much for that feedback. Would you be willing to just mention that in a review? And people are generally very generous and will do it. So that's one of the more tangible secrets to success is it's really all about the ratings and reviews. And that requires connection. Frankly, it just requires connection with your guests and your listeners. And oftentimes it takes reach out.